Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Brock Beard from lastcar.info. Welcome back to Behind the Wall, our second episode of the weekend. We did an episode yesterday to talk more about the Josh Williams situation on the Xfinity side as well as the Truck Series race there. So if you missed that discussion, that video is already available on here. But today, the primary focus is going to be on the Cup Series race. Of course, we'll still be doing our trivia segment and everything else from our show here along the way. So unofficially, pending the results of post-race inspection, Joey Logano has ended the streak of Chevrolet drivers winning this season by taking a very convincing victory at the Atlanta race today, the 400-miler, just ahead of Brad Keselowski, who seemed very close to getting his first win since the reincorporation of the Roush Fenway effort there, now RFK Racing. As was mentioned in the broadcast, the last time the number 6 car won a Cup Series race was with David Reagan back in the UPS car in July of 2011. So it has been a very long time coming. We've seen the Roush team win since then with the 17 team, of course, the times with Ricky Stenhouse before ultimately Chris Buescher took over and his win at Bristol last year. Close but no cigar, unfortunately. So that streak is going to continue on at least for another week. We'll see what things happen at COTA there. But I think that given the overall performance they had and how good the Fords looked in general in this race, I think there's a lot of positives they can glean from this to look for future races here. As was mentioned as well, I mean, Keselowski comes into this race here, or comes out of it rather, being able to be a leader in every one of these races this season, which was definitely not where the team's performance was at last year right after the reorganization. So we'll see what happens in that sense there. I will say, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, probably not the most exciting race for probably about a good 75% of this one here. I'll have to say, even the battles at the back of the field there were not exactly the most compelling there. When it finally came down to it, though, I'd say probably the last 60 or so laps there, especially after the big wreck started by what looked like contact between Ross Chastain and Harvick, but further replay seemed to indicate Harvick at least just broke loose, whether or not he was overdriving the corner or being forced into the corner too fast. I guess there's plenty of debate, we can still have on that for sure. Really, from that point on, the race really picked up. And luckily, it did not become what we usually see at these super speedways, the red light, green light phenomenon we've talked about here on the show, where it's just wreck after wreck after wreck, and then whoever survives ends up being the leader. Unfortunately, it's how the Daytona 500 played out this year, which was quite the opposite in its racecraft. I thought even during the first 3 quarters of that race, it was much more compelling. But we heard some more negative expressions about this track and the kind of racing that it's producing. Ryan Preece, who briefly was your last place runner for a portion of this event, was very upset with the quality of racing here. Very similar to what concerns we heard from Justin Allgaier yesterday in the Xfinity Series race. But I will have to say, the last few laps there, yeah, they were compelling. They were good. Had a good race to the end. Joey Logano had easily the best car out there, so we got to even see the best car win, which you don't always see at a super speedway. Sometimes just weird stuff happens at the end. Somebody runs out of gas, somebody gets in a big wreck, somebody just gets nerfed out of the way or just picks the wrong draft line, and suddenly they're yesterday's news. Yeah, I mean, kind of, again, I feel a little optimistic from some aspects of this race. My expectations were pretty low after what we saw in yesterday's Xfinity and truck races, both in the overall quality of the broadcast and the quality of the racing. Yes, there were, there were portions of it that weren't really that competitive. But, again, I thought a decent stretch run to the end. Is it the racetrack? Is it the drivers just running really conservatively, not wanting to tear up equipment? How much of the factor is it from one to the next? Is this going to change as the surface ages more? As it ages, is it going to return to something even close to what we saw over at the Atlanta track for so many years after the 1997 reconfiguration? Seems like that's not going to happen. I think even a track like Daytona or Talladega, when it ages, especially if they're going to treat this like a super speedway and have out of bounds lines and everything else, I don't predict it's going to change an awful lot. If anything, maybe, I don't think it's going to create the kind of racing where people have multiple different grooves to work with. Seems like the intent with this particular reconfiguration was to create as narrow of a groove as possible, so you have to just run that single line through there, and kind of trying to do, even more than, Talladega or Daytona. Again, we talked about this a little bit yesterday. You can have a situation where you could get out of the way if you need to. It's very hard to do so, especially at Daytona, but it is at least possible. To get out of the way. In this one here, we saw this towards the end of this, where you had Bubba Wallace and Ryan Preece off the lead lap. They had to really work overtime and be completely below the apron and even almost towards the grass to just completely not be a factor in what was happening on the track there. So it's still a little bit hazardous that way. The tight confines of this track, I think, aren't necessarily conducive to this kind of racing. But, they've already done it. And do I see them throwing a lot of money at it to change it in any way? I'm not sure. I really don't think so. I don't think it's even going to be something like we had with Bristol, where the style of racing was like the opposite. It went from being a single groove track to a multi-groove track, and people able to wash up a track and try multiple different lanes, and the drivers being really excited about it, and fans not really being that interested in it because, now suddenly you don't have that typical beating and banging there. We're kind of doing the opposite here. We had one where it had many lanes, many different options for cars to get around it. It's like, no, now you got to do this one lane, especially on the back half of the track, and you can run too wide through there and just hold it wide open. But it's, again, just such fundamentally different racing there. So, but, again, as much as I'm not a big fan of this track, again, I was pleased with the finish. I was pleased that it wasn't, a complete, absolute mess out there. Although we did have, again, we had a couple pretty hard hits, that led up to that, but, not involving perhaps as many cars as, one would expect, especially on a super speedway of the other varieties there. And also really in the broadcast too. We had a couple of situations this weekend where we had a wreck that happened during a commercial break. And after several complaints, myself included here, about ones that happened earlier this year, especially at Daytona, they broke out a commercial, especially with the Kyle Larson incident today. And it was good to see. Again, I'm looking for positives wherever I can find them there. I'm not going to be unreasonable in my critiques about the broadcast or anything. If there's some kind of improvement there, I think that would be another way to look at it. So that's kind of the way to, I'm kind of looking at it here. But I will say again, not the most competitive race, but I don't know how much of that is in the driver's hands versus the track. We saw something similar to this. I think last July's race in particular seemed to play out a little bit more like this once everybody kind of figured out more or less what to expect after the spring event. This felt a lot like that, all the way down to BJ McLeod ultimately finishing last because of a wreck on the backstretch. It's pretty much the same way he fell out of his last year, although in this one it turned out to be a much larger accident in this case. By the way, one of the last car statistics for this week, as I mentioned towards the end of the race here, the last place qualifier, the Truck Series, Xfinity, and Cup all did finish last in the same weekend. I don't know the last time that did happen. It's a little bit hard to kind of track that. I need to find a way to kind of compile my stat sheets to kind of figure that out. But I would say that that's pretty rare for that to happen. And I would especially say it like a track that runs like a super speedway, where a lot of times it's usually a driver towards the front of the field. You have an early wreck where people are trying to do kind of crazy moves and working things around, and then that plays out that way. But that was definitely not the case this time around here. Other runs we got to look at through the field here. Joey Logano, again, unofficially your race winner. Brad Keselowski in the second spot there, so close to the victory, but still has a lot to look forward to. Christopher Bell, I believe, is continuing the momentum that he picked up last season as being a real good closer in these races. We saw a lot of improvement from the Ford and the Toyota teams to kind of close the gap on the Chevys, and Bell was definitely a part of that effort too. Corey LaJoie with the fourth place finish. Glad he can actually have, a solid run after the one last July. It was heartbreaking enough that he lost the race to Chase Elliott and the way that he lost it. with the contact and being put into the wall, and then not even be able to leave with the car in one piece so they could return and bring it this past year. I don't know if this was the same car. I would assume it's Spire Motorsports with a little bit more limited assets than perhaps a Hendrick or another team has. I know they have the cap on how many cars you have anyway, so that probably makes it a moot point. But whatever they did, they had at least as good of a car there, and he was in and out of that top 10 for most of this here, and still getting a good finish there in the 4th spot. It's a career best, I think, for him. Has he had a top 5 before? I'm not sure if he has. I know that Ty Gibbs' finish, at least the unofficial one here with him in the 9th spot, is a new career best because he got a top 10 at Michigan last year. So that would be a new best for him. Actually, looking at the results here, yes, the 5th place run in the spring race last year, Corey LaJoie had. So again, this track, I guess there's one person that's going to be pretty happy about this reconfiguration. That would be him. From being 5th in this race last spring, almost winning the race before the wreck last July, and then finishing now a career best 4th, the only top 5s of his Cup career, which is now up to 205 Cup starts. So congratulations to him on the performance. Very well deserved there. Tyler Reddick, despite an illness at the earlier part of this year, or earlier part of this day, rather, the discussion brought up on the Fox broadcast there that he wasn't feeling well, excused from the driver introductions, or the driver's meeting, rather. Comes back out there and finishes in 5th. Did not need John Hunter Nemechek as his relief driver. Yeah, fantastic. I think he's really building on the momentum of that great run he had at Phoenix last week and has completely turned around his season already in just these 2 races. Would not be surprised if he's suddenly a factor in these next couple weeks. Could even be at COTA, given the fact that his first Cup win was at Road America last year, and that he also won the Indy Road Course. Perhaps a track like this is something that he can, really capitalize on at the same time. Denny Hamlin back in the 6th spot. Ryan Blaney in 7th. Eric Jones 8th. Ty Gibbs, again, a career best 9th for him. And Kyle Busch rounding out the top 10 after recovering from the wreck on the back straightaway there. It looked like he didn't. I thought he got more damage than he did in that particular incident. But good to see him get a good finish. Speaking of which as well, Noah Gragson in the 12th spot there. That's got to be his season best already. He's had so much bad luck in that 42 car this year. Very similar to kind of the situations that Ty Gibbs has had this season, trying to get his feet under him. Good to see, especially with his teammate Eric Jones in the top 10. I think a good effort there for the Legacy Motor Club in general. Ross Chastain in 13th, Bowman 14th, and Todd Gilliland, who had been very much a standout at Talladega and Daytona between last season and this season. And I believe he had a good run in Atlanta last year. I think he was a factor in at least one of those. But coming back to finish the 15th spot there at the same time. We saw Ricky Stenhouse up front for a bit. And it was interesting listening to Ryan Preece's radio during that, because the reputation that Stenhouse, whether deservedly or undeservedly, has picked up over the years of being kind of a crash magnet, still was very much the case. They were kind of waiting for a caution, Preece was, to kind of maybe get one of their laps back. But ultimately, the 47 car kept his nose clean and finished back in the 17th spot at the end of this one here. But further back in the lineup there, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, B.J. McLeod, your last place finisher, but not until very late in the race. In fact, much like we saw with Akinori Ogata in the Truck Series race yesterday, McLeod had stayed on the lead lap and was among these other drivers that were out there, really trying to kind of stay on the lead lap as long as they could. The turning point seemed to be about 175 laps into the race that he had formed a draft, as well as the lapped, Bubba Wallace's car, as well as Cody Ware and J.J. Yaley. And they had about a draft of about those 4 or 5 cars at the back of the pack, and were able to kind of keep up as well, enough that even if they kind of lost touch with the pack, they weren't going to be lapped themselves. They were just running just enough to help out there. And I think the speed of Bubba's car probably was a factor in them not being lapped as quickly as they would have been in ordinary circumstances. Bubba, of course, was involved in the first caution of this race when he spun out by himself down the backstretch, nosed into the inside wall. The team did a fine job getting him back out there to clear the crash clock and try to get his best to run as he could. He, of course, was counting on getting some laps back from the cautions that unfortunately didn't fall. Unfortunately for him, rather. He looked like he was going to be a shoe-in for last place for the first part of it there, or at least outlast some attrition that was going to happen a little bit later on. Right when it seemed like that was probably not going to happen, Ryan Preece had a situation with a dropped cylinder. It sounded like it was either a spark plug or a plug wire or something was going on. The team made at least a couple of stops where they looked under the hood. By that point, he had lost already multiple laps to the field, and Bubba Wallace was able to get back around him. The 41 was in last place for a lot of this and was running by himself. Didn't seem to have the advantage that Bubba did, where they were able to draft with the other back markers there. And again, keeping a lot of those cars on the lead lap. I think that was a mutually beneficial deal for a lot of those guys back there. And ultimately, it seemed like the repairs for the 41 car were taking a lot longer, and the issue seemed a lot worse. It sounded like I was wondering if he was going to lose the engine at some point there. But again, I think kudos to the Stewart-Haas racing effort there for putting together a decent enough piece there that was able to hold together and make it to the finish. And ultimately, when you did have these two very big accidents, he was able to climb up a few spots. In fact, in the results here, it shows him 16 laps down, but all the way up to 28th spot after running as far back as 36th. So a fine recovery for that team. Sometimes it's not really about having the winning car, but just capitalizing on a day where maybe other people struggle. And certainly the wreck that ultimately did happen was a part of that. I'm sure that seeing Chastain up there and when the wreck happened with Harvick made everybody think like, okay, this is a driver that's just being over aggressive. Is this a common denominator situation that we're seeing here? Kind of like Tony Stewart in the early 2000s or Ernie Irvan back in the early 90s. It seems like everybody, whenever there's something that happens around that one car, it's going to get the most attention possible. It did seem, and Bob Bockhorst was right to point this out, that the sequence of events that led to that wreck really started with Chastain making contact with Harvick going into that first corner and really pushing him through the corner. It did seem like they were separate at the very moment that the four was out of control, but maybe something else was happening. I mean, Harvick seemed to indicate that it was something about the motion of Chastain's car in relation to his rear bumper. Something of that nature really kind of affected his handling. But regardless, the outcome was the same. Several cars among the leaders were collected, including Chris Buescher, and then several other cars further back were involved in the chain reaction, including B.J. McLeod, who had been spun out into the wall, had some pretty serious damage to the rear of his car, and then ultimately was not withdrawn from the race, but dropped out of the race there, was towed to the garage area. McLeod was the lowest classified of the cars that were involved in that accident, and so within about 15 laps of the race restarting, was dropped very far back into the pack there. Several contenders being involved in these wrecks, including both of the dominant Hendrick cars that we saw before and through this Phoenix race just last week. Both Kyle Larson and William Byron involved in separate accidents in rapid succession there. Byron ends up in the 32nd spot. Kyle Larson in 31st after a very hard hit with him and Eric Almirola. Almirola had probably one of his best runs we've seen in several months here. And I thought put together a fine showing there. The number 10 car, unfortunately, a flat tire basically just pulled that car around, and he was just along for the ride at that moment. Good to see him checked and released from the infield care center. Same thing with Larson, and then getting back out of the cars. But regardless, a 30th place finish for Almirola, 31st for Larson. Daniel Suarez got some collateral damage in that too. Only completed about 4 more laps and finished in the 29th spot there. It wasn't clear whether that was a DVP situation or something with a toe link or whatever was going on there. But he was at least able to complete a few more laps in Almirola, and that made the difference for that one spot. In spite of the fact that we have a point system that's based so much on winning, it's so good to see these teams really trying to hustle and get the best possible showing that they can. 23 cars on the lead lap at the finish this race, everyone within 1.488 seconds of the race winner, Joey Logano. Ty Dillon, the last of those cars there in the 23rd spot. So good job to see him finish on the lead lap, especially in the same paint scheme where he swept both the last place finishes in the dual race and the 500 this past February, the Ferris paint scheme there. Josh Berry finishes on the lead lap in 18th despite serious nose damage in the incident, the Harvick wreck on the back straightaway. AJ Allmendinger very quietly in the 16th spot. He's going to be excited about next week in COTA, as we all are for sure, with a number of different drivers that are going to be involved in that event at the same time there. But we'll see how that all shakes out. But I think the finish of the race was handling a bit better. I'm still not the biggest fan of this new version of Atlanta. I don't know if we're ever going to return to anything close to what we had at this track. It's sad that they didn't think to do this at Texas instead. I think that seems to be the consensus there, given all the problems that that track has already been having, including the race last fall. I'm sure if NASCAR or SMI had the chance to do it over again, they probably would end up deciding to do it there and maybe just repave Atlanta and, hope that the pavement wears as well as it did back in the 90s there and produces the racing that we've had at that track. Atlanta has always been, it used to be a real, thrilling track, and I don't blame a lot of these drivers, especially ones that really excelled at that track, being as frustrated as they've been there. But I'm not sure what exactly can reconcile that at the exact same time. So we'll see what's happening there. It's a fine deal there for Joey Logano pulling off the victory. Yeah, I gotta say it's a bit of a heartbreaker for BJ McLeod. I hate that they're struggling as much as they are. I know that it's a difficult situation there for these teams that are on the lower end of the chartered efforts. And of course, they always have to be watching over their shoulder because you got other people that are trying to pick up charters. We had the Dale Jr. Show with with Kelly on there and talking about the prices of charters and the market, and that if you get to a point where even Dale Jr.'s team isn't able to get in the Cup Series, that things are getting really competitive, and these teams that are on the lower end are sweating that out a bit, and hopefully they could turn things around a bit. I do still think that the switch to Chevrolet is going to help that 78 car out quite a bit this year. And BJ was pretty clear in talking to him at Fontana that a lot of the issues that they're facing are not issues that are unique to a small team thing. It's really been kind of issues that other teams are having, it's just a matter of how you kind of respond to that. Although it does seem like, like the car he had at Phoenix, for example, which may have been the same car he had from the Clash, given the radio communications he was giving there at the time, had a peculiar kind of handling issue on top of the fuel pump issue that ultimately took him out of the race. It kind of sounded similar to what was going on with Connor Daly's car back at during Speed Weeks there in the dual race before he ultimately made the 500 field in it. So we'll see. Let's see. We got some interviews online here. Matt Weaver speaking with Corey LaJoie there on the top 5 finish. So that's certainly good to see. Let's see. Anything else from the race today? Kind of a little bit of a shorter show here tonight, folks, after discussing the Xfinity and truck race. I guess we could talk a bit more about the Josh Williams situation. As to what NASCAR will do, we are not really going to find out until midweek, much like what we had with all the things that happened last week with the Denny Hamlin and both Hendrick Motorsports penalties and the Justin Haley penalty on top of that. I'm kind of curious if NASCAR still has the car. The indication when we left off the show yesterday was that Josh Williams was released from the Xfinity hauler after a discussion. Williams was saying that he didn't agree with NASCAR's decision, but as he kept saying, it's like, okay, well, this is a rule. They have a rule. It's a rule. It's written, and that's what the deal is. I was a little unclear as to what rule he was mentioning because I wasn't sure if this was a situation where it was related to the crash clock or if there's something else that's separate as to a car that drops debris on the track. If you have one bite of the cookie, I guess, and then like it happens again, and then suddenly you're going to be parked for something like that. That part I'm not clear about because I can't really think of another example where that's happened, where a driver has dropped multiple pieces of debris on the track and been parked just for that. Usually, like we talked about a bit yesterday, it seems like it's something a bit more serious. If it had been just the crash clock in a situation where his clock expired and he stayed out on track, We almost had that today with Harrison Burton, actually, in the Cup Series race, that he got damage on the backstretch incident and came back out there. And then NASCAR told him, look, these laps you're running, we're not going to score. You got to go back to the garage area. And ultimately, that's where he ends up back in the order. In fact, where was Harrison there? Showed him in 34th place with the same number of laps that Harvick completed there. So they really followed through on not scoring a couple of laps. Otherwise, he probably would have been up there with William Byron or closer to Kyle Larson. So that actually had a difference in the outcome there. Williams, it sounds like there's something new that's going to be dropping in his merch store on Monday. So I guess we'll find out about that tomorrow. But really unfortunate. I think that there's still... I'm sure they were very patiently explaining to him what this rule was and why they were calling him to the garage area and saying, look, you should have done this and all that. But again, I would love to learn more about what the exact rule was. And hopefully Pockrass or some of those guys there can kind of, clear that up because, of course, the rule book isn't publicly available to us. It's very different for, people in different positions there in the industry. But I'd really like to find that out because I'm not clear on what, whether this was a broader interpretation of an existing rule that didn't specifically mention dropping debris, or if it was treated in much the same way as a crash clock situation. Maybe this is a corollary to the crash clock where dropping debris is treated the same as not reaching minimum speed or being on pit road for too long and then, the time expires. It did seem like it was taking them some time to put the fender back together, but I'm not sure if that exactly was what the factor was in this case. It seemed like specifically the debris that came off that drew that caution was what ticked NASCAR off, and they were telling him that he was parked. But I will say that the way it was expressed, at least on NASCAR's side, was a little bit, it certainly threw me off listening to it because it sounded like something where they're saying they kind of assumed that he was going to the garage area rather than he was being told to go to the garage area. Certainly once they stopped scoring him, they made very clear that there was no ambiguity at that point. And they were saying, yeah, you got to go to the garage area and that's it. But I hope we get clarification on that because I think that's the part of it that I'm still not fully grasping in this situation. And I'm sure Williams was clearing it up. I was waiting during the interview. There was about a 5-minute interview and I was watching the full version of it there. The audio was a bit better than the one we were trying to play on the show here last night. I just waited for somebody to mention what rule it was because he kept saying it's a rule and I should have gone to the garage area. It's like, okay, well, which rule was that? And I kept waiting for somebody to ask it and nobody asked it. And I don't think it was as open and obvious what he exactly, what was the exact reason for that. So hopefully we find out more about that. I'm a little disappointed to not see that yet. Maybe I'm just not looking in the right place, but I haven't seen that as much here. But I think that needs to be understood there, certainly going forward. And I think it should be certainly understood by the pit crews if it turns out that, something like a piece of debris coming off a car that just draws a debris caution, not even like, and again, I would get it if that were like an intentional thing that alters the outcome of a race, certainly like a playoff race, for example. But again, this wasn't that. This wasn't even to the level of like Chase Elliott's rear bumper a couple of years ago. So I don't know why that is, but hopefully we'll find out. I think that's going to be the other aspect there. So again, your bottom 5 finishers here: BJ McLeod, the 36th spot; Chris Buescher, shown in 35th; Harrison Burton, 34th; Kevin Harvick, 33rd; and William Byron, 32nd. So several very heavy hitters there in the bottom 5. I mean, I would say that's probably one of the very few times that Harvick has usually been in the bottom 5 at Atlanta. Not just the fact that it was the scene of his first Cup Series win, but a track that he had so much dominated in the track's history. Now, obviously, the track that we're running now is radically different from that track. Of course, the entire part of his Cup career to the point of this reconfiguration was just on the 1997 version that was active during all of that. But let's take a look here. I'm going to kind of pull this up in the meantime to check this out. So coming into this race, he had 35 Atlanta starts, 3 wins, 9 top 5s, and 16 top 10s with 2 poles. And his worst finish, okay, no, I'm seeing a couple here that were pretty bad. In 2002, he was really off the mark here. Yeah, so he's had some bottom 5s here before, even in the 29 car era. This 33rd place finish here he had today. But in, let's see, both races in 2002, he was way off. He was 39th in the spring race of 2002 and 40th in the fall race. I mean, that's really surprising. I think I remember the fall one because that was the one where McMurray won his first race. If memory serves, I think he was in a pileup or something like that on the front stretch there. Todd Bodine and a lot of those other guys. But he had those finishes. He was 39th many laps down in the spring of 2006, 35th in the fall race in 2004, which was during the inaugural chase there. And then 33rd in the fall of 2010. I believe that was one of Denny Hamlin's first last place finishes. Hamlin dominated that race and finished in last, but Harvick with a rough night as well. So actually a lot of his worst runs in Atlanta have not been with the 4 at Stewart-Haas, but actually with the 29 at Childress. It's kind of interesting to see that here, especially given the history he's had at the track. But of course, you have to go much higher there to kind of start looking at all the top 5s and top 10s he's had at the track since then. Like I mentioned on Twitter as well, we very nearly had a bit of last car history at the same time. The 41 car, if Ryan Preece had finished in last place, it would have been the first time the 41 finished last in a Cup race at Atlanta since 1992, the Hooters 500, where Hut Strickland was driving a Ford for Larry Hedrick Motorsports. It was involved in that very hard crash on lap 2 with Brett Bodine after Bodine and Rick Mast, who were the front row starters, slid into each other on the very right after racing each other on the first lap. Strickland, I believe, had some serious injuries from that, but managed to recover for going into the 1993 season and driving for Junior Johnson. But kind of a scary way to end the 92 season. But that's very rare for the 41 to finish in last place here. 78, however, this would be the second run in a row at Atlanta for the number 78 and the Live Fast Motorsports effort there, too. All right. One other incident that kind of got lost a little bit here. Your first driver one lap down in 24th, Chase Briscoe. There was word on the radio that the 14 got into the wall and messed up the toe link there, and the car was kind of starting to kind of crab walk around the track. This happened just moments before the Kevin Harvick incident happened, so it got kind of lost in all of that and probably ultimately saved him from losing multiple laps. So him coming back from that and finishing the 24th spot. Incidentally, I'm glad he ran the high point paint scheme. That's, I think, one of the best paint jobs that team has. Not really as crazy about this year's version versus last year's little circuitry patterns on there, but that's kind of a peripheral concern there too. But that's mostly what I have to say on the Cup race here, for sure. And yes, people bringing up Brad Keselowski sharing the same exact mention about the drivers showing each other respect and actually having a green flag finish. That's what it comes down to. And if they can do that at this track, there's really no excuse that they shouldn't be able to do it at other places too. I mean, this one here seems like it's purposefully designed to be like, as close as NASCAR gets to a Mario Kart track. So, I'm not. It's the most absurd thing since the levigated Charlotte track in the mid-2000s and how much of a disaster that was. I'm just glad we didn't have a whole lot of problems with tires at that same time. It's unfortunate when we had that for the situation with Almirola, but it's a good thing it wasn't at least more widespread throughout the field here, too. Andrew Bremner, yeah, Greg Sachs drove the 41 car for most of 92, and indeed Dave Marcus, I believe, ran it for some races, too. There was kind of a weird arrangement there between those programs that season. But yeah, Hut Strickland actually ran it in the Hooters 500 at the same time. Beast Metal, thank you for your super chat here as well. What Boyer brought up today regarding the discontinuation of legitimate practice is simultaneously eye-opening and asinine. It was at least useful in showing the short-sightedness thinking of the RTA and owners. Yes, I'm glad that was brought up. It's a very good point. And certainly, again, when you talk about, we talked about this a little bit yesterday too, with the ability to enter this pit road properly, the ability to adjust to the racecraft that's out there. I know the thinking is that at super speedways like Daytona and Talladega, they don't really want to have a lot of practice because they don't want to tear up a bunch of equipment, because the super speedway cars have whatever other special bits of equipment that are on there. They're that much harder to put together. I get it. I get it. But that's kind of the other situation there too. But and again, like I was talking about this, a little bit there with the rain out that we had on Friday. And obviously that curtailed practice and qualifying, what little practice and qualifying we would have had for the Xfinity and the truck series there, or whatever the plan was with that. Or did they have practice for Xfinity and trucks? Is it just Cup that doesn't have practice of the super speedways, or is it all three series? Because if it's all three series, that's pretty excessive. Either way, whatever it is, whether it's just one series or all three, that is something that needs to be looked at again, because I get like not having like practice all day, like we don't have to have that, but the race itself shouldn't become a test session unless you have something that's just completely unforeseeable that happens. Hopefully, I see this with a lot of these small teams out there. Same thing that happened with Ryan Preece earlier today. It did develop a little later in the race, but if it was a spark plug that was fouled or whatever happened there to cause that one cylinder to not fire, maybe that could have been discovered in practice. Who knows? But I think that's another thing to kind of look at the same time. All right. But thank you for the super chat there for sure. Philip Bailey, thank you for mentioning the Quaker State paint scheme that Suarez is going to have. Yes, I agree. That one looks nice. And again, Trackhouse is really eager to make the most out of those foil numbers and really try to tie them into the scheme and using different colors. RFK is doing this too. I thought the Violet Defense scheme that Buescher was running today looked really good. So hopefully that could be something that they kind of bring that back up there too. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just kind of looking over some of your comments here at the same time. All three races this weekend were won by drivers that won the first stage of their races, according to Donnie Hodgkins. Yeah, so there you go. At least there's some satisfaction in a driver that's at least got some good short run speed. But I think I would say pretty close to all three, although Austin Hill kind of was more of a closer in the Xfinity race yesterday. Certainly when he got to the last stage, he just looked completely unstoppable. But there's still a strong field out there that I think, maybe under different circumstances could have been more competitive. But, Justin Allgaier gets wrecked and some of these other guys definitely changed the complexion of that one there at the same time. Michael Paul, can we please just get rid of the first 150 laps and race for the win? I don't blame people for thinking that. And I know new fans in particular are going to have a lot of issues. If this would have been a terrible race to watch if it was your first race that you ever watched, because you'll just wonder if every one of them play out this way, that everybody runs single file and nobody does anything. Maybe you got a couple of people that break off at the back or a couple of people with mechanical issues. And then suddenly at the end, everything just goes nuts. I think it would create unrealistic expectations of the finish and unrealistic, a way too pessimistic view of everything that leads up to the finish. COTA next week, for example, I think we're setting up for a real barn burner there, especially in the Cup Series. If we're going to have Jordan Taylor, we're going to have Kimi Räikkönen, we're going to have Jenson Button, even Carl Long almost landed some road course driver next week as well, and unfortunately it didn't come through because of a sponsorship issue. But sounds like I know that's more Xfinity rather than Cup, but I think I'm very excited about next week. I would love to see a show put on similar to 2003 at Sears Point, where you had guys like Ron Fellows and Boris Said and Scott Pruitt, I think even in that race as well, having great rides and just being really big contenders for the win there. It's very possible. You never know. And how much they can mix it up out there. I hope it also encourages that we get, larger fields. If we get some of these guys out there. Also curious if we get the Josh Realm effort, the finish line effort from this year. Apparently they were supposed to make their debut at Phoenix. That got pushed back. Since the Realm was part of the Hesburgh effort last year, and they were on a lot of the road courses. I'd like to think that maybe they had a road course car ready for this. But again, I haven't heard anything new on that end. But if we can get a 40-car field at least. With a bunch of road course ringers getting in like extra cars, I think that would be outstanding. I think we're going to be close to it. I guess we're going to be at like 37, maybe 38 cars next week. So it's gonna be a fun entry list storylines to write this week too. I'm excited to get started on that. And then whatever we're gonna get in Xfinity and trucks on top of that. But yeah, I think that's gonna be. I think it's gonna be interesting. And yes, Mark Bancroft. Speaking of COTA, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Not only that Kurt Busch is going to be in the booth, but Gunther Steiner from the what's the proper term? My Formula One ignorance is going to betray itself here. The strategist for Haas or the team principal for Haas, but definitely one of the soundbite darlings from the Drive to Survive series is going to be in the booth. That is going to be fascinating. I'm very surprised. When I saw people starting to tweet that, I thought it was just a meme or something. And I think that just contributes to how interesting that's going to be. I know that the road courses have already produced some really interesting commentary. Andy Lally has been doing a great job here the last couple of years. Apparently this year he's looking more into getting a ride for that weekend. But that's going to be interesting. Okay, Haas F1 principal. Thank you. So, again, I got to brush up my F1 stuff here. Yeah, I think that's going to be really, interesting to see what happens out there. And yeah, if we're going to have that kind of influence there, I mean, it's already a track that was built for F1. It's going to have two former F1 world champions in the field with Button and Raikkonen. And you're going to have like that in the booth. I think that's great. I think that shows wonderful cooperation between the sports there. I mean, again, I've never been the biggest Formula One fan out there, but man, oh man, you got to respect what they've been able to accomplish, especially these last few years. There's a long, proud history in that sport. And what Drive to Survive has done, as much as it dramatizes things and all that, and that's always going to happen, it would be the same thing on the NASCAR side of it. We saw with the Race to Championship show that USA was doing last year. It's been great. I mean, the way they produce their music they produce, how excited their broadcasters are and how involved they are. I think it could be a lot of fun. I think it's going to be a lot of fun this next week. I hope it is. I hope the weather holds out too. Not to say that they wouldn't be able to put on a good show in the rain, but I think that, having, the clearer weather that we saw last year, I think was easily superior to what we saw, the complete chaos in the rain the year before there. So hopefully that plays out well and we can have a good show there. But I think that's great. I think that's wonderful to kind of tie all that together. And again, for me personally, I'm excited about how much of this is going to translate into Sears Point in June, which I believe is still the next road course after COTA. How many of these teams are going to show up? Or are they going to do something like this where they bring somebody with a road course background into the booth or something? I think that would be really exciting. So I'm jazzed up for that for sure, because that will be the next race I'll be covering in person. And we'll be doing some action there too. But yeah, exactly. So yeah, we'll find out. I think that'll be good. I think it'll be a good show. Nicholas Gray, thank you for your super chat there. Without practice, rookies in lower series suffer. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's definitely one of those things it was a short-sighted decision, and it's affecting a lot of people. The less experience you have and the more you need it. You got people that just hop in the cars and they still don't know which switch to flip or, how, just the basic functions of the car. I know there was one time where Akinori Ogata got in Carl Long's car and they were having all kinds of problems at New Hampshire. Problems that would have been very easily solved if he could get in the car and run some practice laps. But it's so much of an issue there with these other drivers out there. And it leads to these situations, in a race where it's like, okay, you got to just get in and go. It creates a situation where, you could be not, landing on NASCAR's good graces because it's like, okay, you made a mistake that could have been cleared up in practice, or, you didn't perform as well as you could have if you had a bit more practice. That's unfortunate. Maybe they need to have something like they used to do with like rookie tests at Darlington, where they would have like a group of guys that are new out there. And it's like, okay, this is a really unique track that's nothing like anything else you've raced on. and nothing else you're going to race on as a Cup Series guy, and then have like a panel of Cup Series veterans walk you through this and kind of evaluate how well you're running. Yeah, I was reading an article for another project that I'm working on here coming up that was talking about this being done back in the 1980s, and they would have a group. Think about that time period where the group would have guys like David Pearson and Bobby Allison and Cale Yarborough, guys that just owned that track, and they're going to tell you it's like, okay, you did pretty good out there, but you need to do this, and these little bits of advice out there that would help you out there. It really helps these lower teams and these newer, less experienced drivers out. And I think now, it's not like practice has become irrelevant, like I talked about on the show yesterday. I think it's just that NASCAR took the wrong mess. They learned the wrong lessons from what happened during the COVID year. I think they found out that they could operate this without practice, but that doesn't mean that it improves the product. That doesn't mean it puts on a better show or even makes a better weekend or anything like that. I guess they could posit it as a cost-saving measure, which so many things are. We hear this from Denny Hamlin's podcast all the time. But is it really in the best interest of the sport? It's like, well, I don't think so. You look at this past week here. Yes, again, rain played a factor, but you had Keith McGee, that was last place in the Truck Series race. He had the transmission pop out of gear. He very likely, because of that, was either using the same transmission or was in the same truck that Josh Rial ran at Vegas that had the exact same problem. And, you figure practice would have been a great opportunity to be able to just fix that and make sure the transmission's not hopping out of gear and you can run a few consecutive laps out there. But that didn't happen, and they end up in the back of the pack. Then you go to the Xfinity race, and on the first lap of the race, the axle fails on Cesar Baccarella's car, and it causes this wreck with Joey Gase. I believe Kyle Sieg got some damage in it too. I'm sure all three of them would have been much better off if maybe that happened in practice. Maybe in that case, it would just been Baccarella spinning out on his own, or maybe they would have found it out while kind of going through their checklist before going out in the first place. Those are really avoidable situations, and I think they're not the only ones. But that kind of needs to be kind of looked at the same time. Early weather for COTA looks good, Bulgogi 77. Okay, well, that's good to know. All right. Because we got storms rolling in out here. You probably won't be able to hear it on the mic, but yeah, it's we've had no shortage of rain out here with that. Yes, Death Killer, thank you for reminding me. Yes, Jimmy Johnson on the COTA list as well. Yeah, him too. Jimmy Johnson has always been it's easy for me to forget that he's still got the ride there with the legacy team, but of course with his investment in the team, makes sense. We'll see if he has a better performance out there than what we saw at Daytona. I know he got caught up in somebody else's mess, but one can easily have that happen at COTA too. But given his IndyCar experience, I think this is a chance to really see what he's been able to learn from that series and translate into this. Obviously, Formula One and IndyCar are galaxies apart, but in terms of competing on road courses and everything, they have their own unique challenges there too. I think it'll be great. Let's see here. We got a couple, we'll do some trivia questions here tonight. I have something for show and tell here for you guys. And also I have some news for the channel itself here in terms of content that's coming up. Let me go ahead and lead off with that because that's kind of the bigger news here. So, first of all, very happy to say, Rise of the Field Fillers is coming back this Friday, March 23rd. I have another episode that's up. It is not the Stanton Barrett episode, but it is a very special episode. I'm very excited to share with everybody. It's going to focus on several of the drivers that we featured already so far. If you are in the patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock, and you are the $5 and up levels, you will have advanced access to that video tonight. You can watch it right after the show tonight here on this very channel. Really through the Patreon, but it's linked back to the channel, of course. So you have that there. And then just today, for the $1 and up level members, I have a new video that I narrated for NASCAR Man History. Very different from the Rise of the Field Fillers deal. This one, again, and very relevant for this upcoming weekend with the increased focus on Formula One and its history, I would say. Tremendous video that he did. I think it's one of his best that he's done. And you'll have advanced access to that as well. It's already in the chat. It's already in the Patreon. I posted it during the race today. So big thanks to NASCAR Man History for sharing that, for the opportunity. I really enjoyed narrating the script, and I had a chance to watch it last Friday to preview it. I thought he did a wonderful job on that. So more content for those of you guys enjoying. Friday's the 24th? Okay, never mind. So Friday, March 24th, not the 23rd. You'll have access to my video, the Rise of the Field Fillers one. And then NASCAR Man's video, I believe it goes public early this week as well. So that's the difference there on that. So yes, so but the important thing is that, yes, on my Patreon, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock, if you are a $5 and up level, you have access to both those videos, both mine and NASCAR Man's. And if you're in the $1 and up levels, or if you're in the $1 level by itself, you'll still have access to NASCAR Man's video. And then the video comes out Friday the 24th for Rise of the Field Fillers. So in the meantime, I got a couple scripts I'm working on, hoping to get those done pretty soon. I've got at least 2 other videos here that I'm kind of working on. It's just a matter of which one's going to be done first. And this past week, this last Wednesday, as a matter of fact, I was able to do an interview on another Field Fillers episode. So for those of you who are longtime followers of the series, this is not the last episode of Rise of the Field Fillers either that's being posted. And I really wanted to follow through with this, especially after 500 days, where I included that teaser at the end of part 4 and said that both episodes of 500 Days were coming and that Rise of the Field Fillers was still going to be continuing. And that's certainly going to be the case. So, yeah, so look forward to that. So we'll have a lot more content for you guys. Hopefully that'll make things a bit easier this year in terms of what's being produced for the channel. I hope to kind of get a lot more stuff together for this channel this year, because there's a lot of scripts that have just kind of been sitting there and trying to get them finished at the same time. Also, the other big project that I think will be completed this year is the Derek Cope book. I just recently got another copy of the digital manuscript from my editor. He used the same formatting from the J.D. McDuffie book, and it looks really good. He did a really good job on that there. We're getting closer to getting that all kind of tightened up and, looking professional and ready to be in print edition, which includes a photo chapter. We got a lot of pictures that are in there, both from Brian Hallman at the BRH Racing Archives, as well as Charlie Birch, some from my own personal collection, some from Jerry Hayslip and some other photographers in there. I think it's really going to add to that book there as well as cover art done by Rob Taylor, and I'm working with Ryan Daly as well to kind of tie together that cover illustration and to get that together. So we're getting some real good traction on that, and we had some news on that this week. The audiobook will hopefully be coming up about the same time that the print book will be available. I'd love to have it out sometime this year is what we're kind of looking at. So there's a whole lot to really look at the exact same time. So we'll find out on that. Bulgogi77, you had a question about 500 Days. That's still in the works too. There's 2 episodes, in fact, that I'd like to put together here. I'm not exactly sure where they fit in the time frame. It basically depends on whenever the script is ready. I'm setting up my schedule this year, since my trackside coverage is going to be spaced out a bit more, that we don't have the next one until Sears Point in June, and then we're going to do the championship weekend at Phoenix. My thinking is to kind of like just whatever's ready, it's next man up. So it's like if it's a 500 Days episode, then we're just going to jump into that. If it's a standalone video, it's going to be that, and if it's a Field Fillers episode, it's going to be that. I think the important thing is to just get whatever I can get out there, and I want to make sure people that are in the Patreon are getting what they pay for, get their advance access. It's why I'm setting up the access like a week in advance now for my videos. For NASCAR Man, it's a tighter turnaround there, but that's okay because that's the $1 level on that. But for the higher up ones, I want to, especially for them, I want to make sure that they get what's worthwhile there. And I'd like to create some more Patreon exclusive content too. I want to kind of develop that. I have some thoughts on that, and we'll see how that kind of shakes out in the year to come. So I think it's going to be really, really good. And we got some good races coming up here too. So the last car coverage will hopefully continue to be fun to put together at the same time. And of course, we'll still be doing these shows right here So yeah, so busy time. On top of all this, actually, I got jury duty tomorrow too. So we got kind of a lot of things that are happening at the same time. So we got that. Michael Jensen, thank you for the super chat there. I'd love to see a video about some of the quirky rules manipulation through the years, like when Hendrick used a Winston West provisional for Craven at Phoenix when it wasn't a West combo race. See, that would be interesting. I think that would turn out to be a pretty long video because you're going to have a lot of different times where teams kind of fudge the rules, one way or the other. I think, you could look at Hendrick even, that story there, I'm not as familiar with. I'm thinking about, a West Series entry. Like if they entered him in the West Series race, I was wondering if that would be at the time where West races were separated off and you didn't have the combination races. But I like the idea. That's intriguing right there. So maybe we'll find out what happens about that. Parker, thank you for enjoying the J.D. McDuffie book too. So yeah, I talk about having a lot on your plate, Charles Peterson. Yeah, no, the big thing is though, is like it's not like all these things are coming up exactly at the same time. Basically, I think this year I'm just trying to just kind of focus on one thing at a time, and then as it's done, let's just get it out there and then on to the next one there. But it's a good thing. It's a good thing to have a lot of things kind of in the works. But yeah, I don't want it to be a log jam where it feels like I'm just doing a little bit on this one, a little bit on that one, and then you're kind of waiting a long time for all these things. I don't want to get to that point. But I think it's just a matter of just finding the right rhythm there. I work by 9 to 5 and I just try to kind of fit these things in when I can in between there. And it's challenging, but it's a good challenge. And once the Cope book is done, that's going to free up a lot more time because that's been something that has been kind of distracting me a bit. I mean, the Copes have been so cool and so patient in this project, and it's been more than 5 years at this point, really. The work on this really started at Phoenix in 2018, which was just a couple months after the J.D. McDuffie book came out. So I wanted to be very quick to kind of set the other one. And I think the other thing that's important with this, too, is I wanted to kind of set the tone with these books that they weren't all going to be on a tragic moment in the sport's history. I think that going the opposite from J.D. and talking about a driver that not only won, but won the sport's biggest race and kind of shedding new lights on his career, I think that would show that really what it is, and hopefully in future books as well, because I'd love to, have other things come up there too, is just kind of shedding new light and offering new detail to stories, even if stories that are ones that people think they know or ones that are publicized enough. Because everybody knows about Derek Cope winning that 500. But there's so much that happened to get him to that point, and so much that happened after that too. Of course, you remember our coverage at Phoenix when Starcom Racing ran their last race and what happened back then. In fact, during that weekend, they actually, Derek and Alicia actually retrieved the latest copy of my manuscript from the rental car in the infield there that exact same afternoon. So there's this connection where the story really had to keep evolving to kind of track what was happening with their team and what they've been working on since then. And then now they're involved with Nitro Motorsports in the Trans Am series. And Derek himself has got a beautiful race car that he's running in TA1 out there. Fantastic for him there. So that'll be other things to kind of talk about at the same time. But thank you so much. Retire and do this full-time or part-time. Garbage play. Yeah. I've been penciling it out. I don't think that's going to be in the near future, man. But again, I really do appreciate those of you who are able to share the videos here. I mean, again, the best way is on the Patreon. If you're able to join anything on that, that's a tremendous help because it not only helps fund these videos, whether it's licensing fees or anything of that sort there, or just equipment to use to produce the videos. It also helps pay our two staff writers, Ben Schneider and William Saki. It also goes towards just offsetting the cost of our trackside coverage, frankly. That's a big part of it too. So that is huge. So if anybody that's able to be a part of that there, and then I can also, the other part of it that goes to is actually some bonus stuff for Patreon members themselves, whether it's newsletters, stickers, doing the magnets, the car magnets, and mailing those out. That all factors into that as well. So it goes to help a lot of things that help this channel run here at the same time. as well as the website. But I know not everybody can do that, and that's totally cool. The next best thing is just share these videos. Anything videos on this channel, share them with your friends, anybody else that's interested in racing. It's flattering to be on some of these tier lists that people are sharing and stuff like that. Both myself, NASCAR Man, and other people that are really passionate about the history of the sport. Scene Vault, I think I would include them on that too, because they have a video aspect to the interviews that they do at the same time. I think that's tremendous. So yeah, that's the next best thing there. So I really do appreciate that, and I hope to keep producing stuff that you guys enjoy. So one of these days, maybe that'll be a full-time thing. I'm not sure that's going to be in the near future, but one of these days. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I do appreciate that for sure. Let's see. Just read about the Craven thing. I got to read about that. That's actually new to me, Michael Jensen. So thank you for the super chat on that. I was thinking, that's really interesting. Those are little details I love, because those are the little bits of garage intrigue. You could probably make probably a good video on just that subject alone. But we'll see. That's another thing I'd like to do. Not to stack more things on top of it, but I'd like to make more short form content. Believe it or not, every video I do, I usually think about it as short form content initially. But what always happens is I find these other details or these other people that are involved in the story that really have to be a part of it, that you can't leave out of it. To be honest, the Stanton Barrett video became that way because it became a story about not just Stanton, but also his father, Stan Barrett, who had both of them had equally extremely interesting stories. And, again, maybe one video or maybe videos itself won't be enough to do that justice, but there may still be something happening there. So we'll find out. But, that's kind of the way some of these videos go. But I'm very pleased to get this other one out this week. So we still got the Field Fillers episode this week, and NASCAR Man's newest video is in the Patreon there as well. So there's that at the same time. So I do appreciate that. Yeah, racing movie commentaries, Patreon exclusive. Yeah, Leslie Jackson. Yeah, I have one. I think I have two commentary tracks for the $10 levels. One for Driven and one for Days of Thunder. I did those. Obviously, it doesn't have the video in it, so of course you would pull it up on a DVD and sync it up there. So I have those there for the $10 levels. I have a couple other videos in the $10 level. I really want to kind of beef that up. I thought about doing some behind the scenes stuff about maybe like how I do the last place coverage, or like my trackside stuff. Like I have an interview with Kyle Belmont, Andy Belmont's son. That's also in the $10 level. It's just a brief one that I did at Fontana last year after Cindric won the 500. So we got some stuff in there. So that'll be that'll be interesting. So we'll do some trivia questions here in the meantime, and then I'll do show and tell while you guys pick the category you'd like. I still have the Steve Wade answer on this. I'm glad that he got a kick out of that on Twitter this week. So again, we'll go back to the late 90s trivia deal here, and any other questions you have from the race action this weekend. Again, my discussion much more in depth on trucks and Xfinity will be in the video that I posted yesterday. So if you haven't seen that yet, you can still check that out, of course, here on the channel, as well as other content here. But we'll just do trivia here and wrap up this for tonight. Thank you for tuning in. We got up to 75 viewers here. I wasn't sure if we'd have a lot of viewers today with the race being a little bit unusual and having not much happen during the middle stages of it. But I appreciate you guys checking this out here. So we'll do the deal here, and we'll see which category you guys would like. So once again, the categories are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. Those are the categories. So once again, they are NASCAR, pits, teams, tracks, drivers, and the wild card. So those are the categories. So definitely let me know which of those categories you'd like here too. I'd love to see a feature-length movie about the Field Fillers. That'd be fun. Like I say, the Field Fillers, the fun thing about that, and the reason I think I've really enjoyed that series so much, is that was going to be my next book before I decided on the Derek Cope book. So all the material I had gathered already was with the intention of making it a book. But what I found I was doing is I was just transcribing all these video clips that I saw, and it wasn't nearly as interesting. And then it suddenly, and I think it was during the pandemic, it kind of occurred to me. I was like, well, wait a minute. why don't we just make this a video series? And oh my gosh, at that point, it was just so much easier to break this down. And actually, this episode this week was going to be one that was going to be maybe halfway through that book as like a framework device. It's gonna be very interesting. So, but a good review. It's basically gonna be kind of a review of the previous field fillers we talked about. Which, although I didn't plan on this, I think that it makes a really good kind of refresher for the series because it has been more than a year since the last episode, the Hermie Sadler one, Score Motorsports, which I guess was February of 2022. So it's been quite a while. But 500 days was a big reason for that. And now that we got that out, kind of getting back into this again. So we'll do that. So definitely let me know which category you'd like. And I do have something for our show and tell here. So one thing I want to share here, kind of show. And just take a moment here to bring this out. So talking about the Field Fillers series and the 2004 season in general, I thought it would be cool to kind of share one of my favorite paint schemes from that season. And this is not a Field Filler scheme, quite the opposite, but it has been one that was kind of featured in some of this before. So let me kind of get this out of there. Put that down there. So here is, and it was too bad they didn't make this in 64 scale, but I still think it shows 24th. Brendan Gaughan's rookie car from 2004. And those Dodges, once they kind of streamlined the graphics on the nose and kind of did this deal here on the front, I personally like this scheme. As much as I wasn't crazy about Kodak leaving Morgan McClure Motorsports for being there for as long as they were, and as short of a time as this ended up kind of happening with this team here, I was always very partial to this paint scheme, and I was waiting for them to make it in 64th. I don't know if it ever got made, but the 24th here I thought it had a really nice detail to it there. So of course the waning period of Kodak itself, really, I think we got one of our first digital cameras right around this time period here. The concept of film development and this easy share system. I think this was like something like a printer or something that you had back then, so you could actually kind of produce something, just from like a regular camera, not to drop it off at a someplace to get it developed. But a nice scheme though, the red rims on here, and again, the 2004, it was still technically the Intrepid, but what was fascinating is I guess this is a Stratus nose. I'm not as much of a thing on that with that manufacturer history there, but I really liked the way this looked with the grill pattern and everything. They kind of transitioned to this nose in 2003 and still ran the old Intrepid graphics, which made the cars look really strange that season. But in 2004, they kind of stripped that down, and just for this 1 year, I mean, before they brought the Charger in 05, that was kind of the deal there. But yeah, really nice scheme. It's got the rookie stripes on the back of it there. There you go. So you got kind of that look, and it's got the hood open deal there. So yeah, I thought that was pretty. I thought that was pretty neat. I think it was at Talladega in the fall. He had like a top 5 there, and it was one of his best runs until he basically joined the Beard Motorsports team towards the end of his career. Got the rear deck open here as well. So you got the fuel cell. But yeah, and then the underside on here. I don't usually collect too many 24 scale ones, but I've shown a few on the show here. And with the return of field fillers, I felt this would be a good one to bring out. I just got this one recently, actually. But I thought it would kind of tie things in together there a little bit. And this is definitely a car that will feature in our next episode here of Rise of the Field Fillers as well. Even though it's not a field filler itself, it's definitely one of the other competitors, kind of a us versus them battle that will ensue in this particular episode. So look forward to that. And if you're in the Patreon, again, $5 and up level, definitely make sure you check that out, and so you can see that at the same time here. Yeah, Kodak was pretty much dead. Yeah, exactly. Trax looks like it's still the leader there. Okay, cool. They're into printers. That makes sense, Charles. I didn't even think about that. I mean, printer business is really competitive. I mean, Kyocera, I know they sponsored David Starr last year or the year before, and yeah, I know they got really good quality printers. They have ones where like the ink cartridges, you can just throw them in a recycle bin, so you don't actually have to dispose of them like technology, like other technological waste. They're actually like biodegradable. Like I thought that was actually that's not a big thing in my book. I'm just thinking of it more in like a convenience sake. Like it's like, oh, that's wonderful. Like you could just because the ink's like a powder. It's kind of weird. Like, okay, this is turned to printer chat here tonight, but that's kind of like another thing. So I don't know if Kodak does something like that, but that would be kind of neat. But yeah, we'll do tracks. I think it looks like tracks is the winning category here, so we'll do that at the same time. They made the Wizard of Oz in 64 scale and the Punisher one. Yeah, I remember Gone ran the Punisher car at Bristol, and he qualified well, if I remember correctly. He was like top 10. Didn't run very well. But the same race that was, I think, right after, I think that was the same weekend Andy Hillenberg had his interview after the Darlington wreck and kind of talked about that too. But yeah, I thought, yeah, I'm not looking to spend a lot on a 64 scale if they only made like 5 of them there. So, but this will be nice. One of these days, I'd like to display whatever 24s I have somewhere one of these days. And this one I really like to feature well because it kind of has a nice, it's an interesting design, just a little bit of a slice of what things were like in 2004, I think, too. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, drop a toner cartridge. Exactly, yeah, powder. That would be the same deal, too. Yeah. I mean, this one, I mean, again, I've worked with this printer before. It seems like it stays pretty well contained, so it doesn't spill out of it. But it does have like this printer I've worked with, it has like an overflow. So there's like a little container, maybe about this big. You kind of got to jam it at the bottom of the printer. And then like any overflowing toner is just going to go in there. You would think you'd be able to reuse that again, but it probably gets it from all the different colors, so you can't use it. Yeah, that's kind of weird. I don't know. I'm not the most technologically minded when it comes to stuff like that, but sometimes it's interesting just to printers are kind of weird because you got kind of it has more that mechanical sense versus other things that computers do, and you can kind of see physically how it's working. Not many things these days seem to have that same element, especially if everything you could look at is just on a phone and you can't figure out any moving parts on that. So I don't know. Maybe that's probably the aspect. Let's see. Let's get the tracks here and do some questions. All right, here we go. First question, folks. What track moved its start finish line to Tyler Tower in 1997? What track moved its start finish line to Tyler Tower in 1997? There we go. What track moved its start finish line to Tyler Tower in 1997? Yeah, think about that one. I think I have a Kodak disposable camera or two that have undeveloped film in them. Yeah, I think so too. We got one. We have one on the back of our minivan that was like somewhere there. But yeah, I don't. Yeah, I don't even know what the shelf life of the film itself is, especially if it's like pulled out of the roll. Um, I'm sure whatever it is. Yeah, I don't know if it does anything there. All right, Philip. I'm glad you enjoy the post race shows. Thank you for tuning in. Yeah, I don't know. I try to be as informative as I can, but I tend to kind of ramble on. But probably better this way rather than rambling at other people. Just rambling at the family, I guess. What track moved its start finish line to Tyler Tower in 1997? And the answer is Darlington. It is Darlington. I was kind of thinking Atlanta too. I mean, it would have been interesting timing with the race today, but Darlington for sure. All right. Here we go. Next question. What state has tracks named Quincy Raceways and Rockford Speedway. So we're looking for a name of a state. What state has tracks named Quincy Raceways and Rockford Speedway? Yeah, what state has tracks named Quincy Raceways and Rockford Speedway? It's a Stratus style nose. Okay, I thought it was, yeah. That name sounded familiar somewhere. Yeah, I think 2004 was probably, to me, I think that was the best the way the cars looked in a while. Probably the best the paint schemes looked, I think, actually was like the 2000 season. 2001, 2002 were like right around there too. But like 2000 season, they were gorgeous. I don't think there was one bad paint scheme that year. Like, yeah, it's strange. For all that happened that year, of course, at the same time. Um, it's like everybody agreed to just have like the most dazzling looking car possible, and like it was going to stand out. You know, I still think the Viagra car, that the 27, the Eel River Racing car, I still think that one looked way better than any of the ones Mark Martin ran. As much as I like Mark Martin, I think that scheme looked better because it kind of did this silver. It kind of did the silver and blue thing, and it brought back the 27 because Barry Dodson was involved with the team, so it was kind of a throwback to the '89 team there. So yeah. What state has tracks named Quincy Raceways and Rockford Speedway? We got guesses. We got a lot of Midwestern guesses here. We see a lot of Illinois and Indiana. We also have an Alaska. All right, here we go. 99 had some good ones. Yes, it did. Yes, they did. And the answer is indeed Illinois. A lot of you got that one. Illinois is the correct answer. Bean Boy 89, looks like you were the first one on that one. Let's see. Let's get another one here. That was too easy. Alrighty. Next question. What track was built between November of 1995 and April of 1997? What track was built between November of 1995 and April of 1997? That kind of gives you an idea about, I guess, how long it's going to take Fontana to get rebuilt. If we have a stat here about a track that took well more than a calendar year to produce, probably why that maybe lends a little more credence to why. I mean, hopefully something happens with it, but I don't know. All right. What track was built between November of 1995 and April of 1997? Took them a few tries to get it right. Yeah, no, that's true. This is Rockford's last season? Okay, I wasn't aware of that. Goodness. Oh, don't like hearing that when you get these tracks that are closing down. There's been different news on different fronts with what Nashville and Greenville Pickens and everything. Um, so we'll see. I haven't seen Slapshoe's latest video. I guess he was talking more about Greenville Pickens in one of those. But yeah. What track was built between November of 95 and April of 97? The answer is indeed California. It's California. So it's finished. I think the first race was like May or June, so that's pretty close to when it started. So California is the correct answer. Joey Fairbanks, looks like you were the first one on that one. A lot of you guessed Texas, which isn't a bad guess, given the fact that it started in 97 at the same time. Auto Club sponsorship ended, so it's back to California Speedway. Yeah, this is like an older thing on this, but yeah, I imagine, yeah, with the reconfiguration. Although I don't know. I don't know if the reconfiguration is something that AAA is still going to sponsor, but that's the first time hearing of it if they've really scaled back. Next question. What tracks fans saw Davey Allison get his final NASCAR Winston Cup win? What tracks fans saw Davey Allison get his final NASCAR Winston Cup win? Fontana and Sears Point swapped dates for 98. That makes sense, actually. That would explain why we stopped running in May and we started running in June. I think a spring race there would be interesting to see and maybe bring us back to being the first road course of the year. Although I don't think COTA is going to get rid of their weekend or move their weekend elsewhere. Who knows? Who knows? I kind of liked when Sears Point was the first one, the first road course of the year, because then it always was that you had somebody that was really good for like the first maybe 10 or 12 races of the season or whenever we were in the schedule, usually around mid-season, and then suddenly Sears Point comes and then they really struggle. Or maybe they continue to do well and it's just as surprising. Or in other cases, still other cases, somebody that wasn't good at all comes into this race and then wins. Like when Tony Stewart or Kyle Busch turned their seasons around like a decade apart. So yeah. What tracks fans saw Davey Allison get his final NASCAR Winston Cup win? We got guesses from Michigan, Phoenix, Richmond, New Hampshire, Charlotte. Alrighty, the answer is indeed Richmond. A lot of you got that. Richmond indeed. Wayne Stell, looks like you were the first one on that. Richmond is the correct answer. Let's see. Alrighty. So we'll probably do just one more question here for tonight. And we'll wrap things up. We're about to come up to the top of the hour. Probably good as time as any. So one more question here for you guys tonight, folks. Thank you for tuning in. Question is, what track hosted Donnie Allison's last NASCAR Winston Cup start? Don't look it up. Try to guess it. What track hosted Donnie Allison's last NASCAR Winston Cup start? Yeah, think about that. What track hosted Donnie Allison's last NASCAR Winston Cup start? I'm going to look it up. The answer would be, but I'm going to check it out. Alrighty. Interesting. What track hosted Donnie Allison's last NASCAR Winston Cup start? His last Winston Cup start. Which track? It guesses for Daytona, Atlanta, Wilkesboro, Darlington, Josh Williams Land, Talladega, Richmond Fairgrounds, Riverside. Okay, here we go. One more time, folks. What track hosted Donnie Allison's last NASCAR Winston Cup start? The answer is Michigan. Michigan is the correct answer. And Austin Foster, looks like you were the first one on that. So there you go. I think you might have been the only one to guess Michigan. Michigan is correct. And to kind of wrap this up, let me pull it up here. Boom, there it is. You can see it on the screen. Here we go. The August 21st, 1988 race at Michigan, the Champion Sparkplug 400. And did Donnie Allison finish last? No, but he started 41st and finished 35th in Bob Clark's Slender U Figure Salon's Oldsmobile there. Engine problems there. That would be his 242nd and final Cup start. So 1988. Very late in his career there. I thought my answer was going to be Charlotte because I think he got hurt there once. Maybe that was this start here in 86. No, that's Darlington. He drove for Henley Gray. Atlanta, Riverside. Okay, must have happened much earlier if it happened at all. But yeah, I seem to remember something else about running at a different track there. There's a Charlotte race with an engine failure. Interesting. But yes, Michigan is your correct answer on that one. Yeah, kind of a weird one. That's an interesting one. I'm glad it had a real challenging question, so I think that's a good one to wrap things up for tonight. Before we go, let's take a look here at to see if we have a call on technical inspection yet. I didn't see anything in chat, I don't think. No, these are still a couple of videos here that Parker has posted earlier. Let's see. Nope, not seeing it there at the moment. Still showing, Harrison Burton out with the DVP. And who is that? Suarez out with the DVP as well. But the other ones that were eliminated with crash damage in the Cup race, that is, listed as an accident. So I know that Suarez did run a couple laps afterwards, and Harrison Burton tried to, but they didn't classify, or they didn't register those laps. They didn't score them. So that's the situation. So as of right now, we don't have a call on technical inspection yet. So we'll do that. But we'll do some more trivia next week. Austin, I appreciate it. I'm glad you're enjoying the trivia. But we'll probably go ahead and just wrap it up tonight, since I already did the show yesterday there as well. And we'll hit it fresh for next week for Circuit of the Americas. And we got plenty more content for you guys. Also, for those of you guys that are interested in checking out the videos on the Patreon, patreon.com/LastCarOnBrock. The next episode of Field Fillers is available for members $5 and up, and members $1 and up. The next video done by NASCAR Man History is available on there. And if you're in the $5 and up, you get actual access to both those videos. So his video will premiere first this week, and then mine on Friday the 24th. Then after that, we'll have hopefully some more content for you guys pretty soon. But in the meantime, the website is lastcar.info. Twitter feed is at LastCarOnBrock. And if you're interested in other content on this channel, definitely check it out. So thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. Our next show will be after the COTA weekend, Circuit of the Americas, next Sunday after the Cup race, usually about 15-20 minutes after the conclusion of the race. Stay tuned to this channel right here. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so that way you can get notified of future live streams on this channel. And we'll talk about it then. So have a great week, everyone. Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.